Hello and welcome back to the Kentucky Kernel News Podcast, the University of Kentucky's award-winning student-led newspaper. I'm here with my co-host, Giana Gallo. Would you like to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
So today we'll be talking to the sports editor of the Kentucky Kernel, Cole Parke, about Kentucky football's win over Louisville this weekend, what it's like to be a sports journalist, and if head football coach Mark Stoops is leaving. All right, let's go. Hey, this is Nate Lucas coming from Post. I forgot to say that I'm Nate Lucas. Forgot to introduce myself, and I also forgot to say that the opinions expressed on this podcast are the speaker's own and do not reflect the Kentucky Kernel's opinions. All right, now that we're ready, let's go. Okay, so first off, before we introduce our guest, L's down, baby. L's down.
L's down.
L's down. I know we're supposed to be journalists and we're not supposed to be, what's it called, to one side or the
Biased.
other. Yeah, we're not supposed to be biased to one side or the other, but L's down, baby.
L's down. We are at the University
We
of
owe
Kentucky.
Louisville. All right, and sorry to our listeners if that was a little loud for your ears. I know we're not usually this loud here. But today we're bringing on our first recurring guest for the Kentucky Kernel News Podcast, the Kernel sports editor, Cole Parke. And how are you doing, Cole?
Doing all right. How about you guys?
Doing good.
Glad that Kentucky won.
Yeah, me too. I'm very glad. So let's work our way backwards with possibly the most important news or the most important non-news of the week, Mark Stoops not becoming Texas A&M's head coach. So can you give a breakdown of what happened this week, Cole?
Oh, boy. So I guess things started really and truly before the Louisville game. But, you hear rumblings of things. But to be honest with you, when you're covering an SEC football program, when do you not? I've heard Mark Stoops to Michigan State, to Iowa, to Nebraska, to all these places. You kind of just learn to tune that out. But I would say the first time people start realizing there might be more than just a little bit of smoke there is that morning before the Louisville game on College Game Day. It was Pete Thamel from ESPN. He reported that Mark Stoops was potentially a big candidate for Texas A&M. So, we went into the game with a bit of a headache. It had been a pretty rough season for Kentucky, so there was a lot of mixed opinions about that. Obviously, we'll get to the actual game itself, but obviously the Cats won. And, Stoops was asked about it post-game. I believe it was Nick Roush from KSR that asked him, but in normal coach fashion, he deflected that. He said, I believe his actual answer was, you know better than that. But he said, I'm focused on my team. So people kind of started to not forget about it, but kind of put it on the back burner for a little bit. It was a big win, and not many people thought that a lot was going to come out of it. But then that night, I was actually in bed. I had been watching Alabama-Auburn on the way back, and I was watching Washington State, and the next game coming on after that, I believe, was Florida State. Watching some college football, as one does, trying to enjoy myself, and obviously just discussing things. And I was talking to some people, I'm pretty good friends with a lot of people in the UK beat and in the media, and it was like, it's kind of a headache, because it's kind of a busy time when football and basketball are overlapping. So I was just so ready for football to be, calming down a little bit, and it seemed like it was doing the opposite of that. In fact, it seemed like it was ramping up with that because, when you're looking at a head coach leaving a university, there's a lot more than just that story. There's like 6-7 stories that come out of that. It was going to be a big deal, but I was not expecting it to move as fast as it did. It was around, I want to say, it was later into the night, 8, 9, even 10 p.m. when 24/7 Sports got from, I believe it was Aggie Yell, Texas A&M's kind of message boards, that it was Mark Passwaters said that it was all but, he said barring a late last-minute collapse, it was going to happen. So that's when you kind of start having alarms go off in your head, because you're like, well, I'm probably going to have to write something about this tonight then. That's not I can put this off till tomorrow issue. That's we have to deal with this tonight. So I got up and I start, writing a story, and that's when 24/7 Sports puts out that it's almost confirmed. Like, he's going to sign the contract. So then I'm like, well, dang, I text my bosses, I text some other reporters, and, by this point you have players, like Kentucky players, reacting to the news on Twitter because they're finding this out as well. And it was just a whole, crapshoot, because apart from people that have some sources inside Texas A&M, everyone's like, what is going on? And it's hard to, confirm some of those things because a lot of people are confirming things based on what they've heard from somebody else, which they heard from somebody else. So it's a lot of, through the grapevine type things. And I truthfully don't know if we'll ever know for sure what went down in the last minute collapse. But I was actually, dealing with that, writing a story. I was getting ready to do a reflection on, Stoops' tenure in Lexington because it was pretty much coming to an end. But it was then that Matt Jones of KSR, he'd been spending a lot of the night with Vince Marrow. He's a recruiting director and associate head coach for Kentucky. He put out, per a great source, that Mark Stoops was staying in Lexington. And from that, Pete Thamel also put that out. So did Feldman from The Athletic. I mean, you have some big names putting out that it's not happening. And 24/7 kept their original report up, but they had taken down another story they'd published, like kind of, just kind of poking fun at kind of the idea, like Mark Stoops will have plenty of money in Texas A&M, all that stuff because of the whole pony up comments. So they deleted that. So then, I was in a Twitter space and that was going on with other journalists, kind of like looking at what was going on, and it was like a complete 180 almost immediately that it just definitively wasn't happening. And Mark Stoops is not a very active guy on Twitter by any means, but he put out a tweet past midnight saying that he'd been offered or that he'd been approached about an opportunity, and he said he turned it down. I don't know exactly what happened there, and then you had the original people, Passwaters, Aggie Yell, saying that it wasn't happening. And I want to clarify, there was a lot of outrage by Texas A&M fans. They were very unhappy with this hire. And it was after that UK's actual PR team put out a post. It's probably one of the only times this year you'll see UK put out a post around 1 a.m. in the middle of the night. But they put out a post about Stoops, basically kind of showing that he's staying. And it went from 2.5 hours he was gone to he's definitively staying, and it was just a whole fiasco and late on Saturday night.
Wow.
What do you like Stoops as the UK coach?
I mean, yeah, I feel like it's hard not to. I mean, certainly I've got a column coming out about it here shortly, hopefully, but there's certainly a lot of criticism that can be levied at Stoops. There's certainly a lot of things he's done wrong. There's been coaching decisions, you can look at, if you want to go more in depth, Kentucky has had difficulties developing a quarterback. The big blue wall, the offensive line's kind of been deteriorating since the unfortunate passing of John Schlarman. There's been some culture issues people have kind of pointed out. But at the end of the day, Mark Stoops is the winningest head coach in UK football history. He surpassed Paul Bear Bryant last year, I believe, is when he surpassed him overall. And he took Kentucky from being a bottom feeder team in the SEC. I mean, his first year when he hadn't quite got his class, and they went 2-10, and they lost to Vanderbilt 40-0 in a near empty Kroger Field. I think it was still Commonwealth Stadium at the time. It might have already changed by that point, but he took Kentucky from a bottom feeder program to one that has recorded two 10-win seasons, and the program has a total of 4 of all time. So he's got 2 of those. And certainly, the program's been a little bit down lately. That's back-to-back 7-5 seasons with losing SEC schedules. But without a doubt, Mark Stoops has, at the very least, laid the foundation if Kentucky football is to continue an upward trajectory. And, I think that a lot of people realized that when the story started coming out that he was leaving. There was a lot of people who, even a day prior, were like, hey, maybe we need a new head coach, that were saying, like, don't go, Stoops, we'll miss you. I linked it in a story. There was someone that even tweeted that, I'm sorry we didn't appreciate you like we should have. People are kind of realizing that, Kentucky, it's easy to think of Kentucky SEC, and especially with the last few years of they've been competitive. But Kentucky, for most of its history in football, has been an absolute joke, respectfully. Nobody took it seriously. It was the way many people see Vanderbilt. It was a free win. And it's simply not that anymore. And it's been struggling lately, but I think it's hard not to respect what Stoops has done. And even, my column is that he is the best thing for Kentucky right now.
Yeah. So if you all want to read Cole's stories, it's on kykernel.com, where you can read all of the Kernel stories. He already has a story out about Texas A&M and Mark Stoops, linked with a bunch of things that he just referenced, and his column will be coming out
Hopefully tonight.
Tonight. Okay.
Ooh.
So by the time that this podcast is released, you all should be able to read it. So
Yeah.
I would recommend going on the website and reading that. But getting to you about your position as a sports journalist, what did this week in story teach you about being a sports journalist, and what are some strategies that you already employed being in sports journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it taught me as much as it reaffirmed things I already knew, and that's that this job is hectic. You know, being a journalist, there's no hours. You don't work a 9 to 5. You're on the clock pretty much all day long, any time of the night. And, you know, sometimes that's difficult to build a life around when you're trying to make plans and do things. But, yeah, I mean, I was just laying in bed ready to kind of settle in for the night, and I had to get up, and I didn't end up going to bed till near 3:30 a.m. that night. So, you know, things that I would say that a good journalist would do that we made sure to do is we kind of try to cover our bases. You know, I'm lucky enough that, especially in journalism, you know, they say sources are very important, and, you know, connections are important. You know, I reached out to other people I knew in the UK media. I reached out to, you know, people I know within the program. I reached out to people who know people within the program. And, you know, I was trying to gather, you know, get every little piece of information I could. And even when we put out the story, you know, I know a lot of people, we got some pushback on Facebook when it ended up kind of turning around. But, you know, even the actual report we put out, we kind of said this is not confirmed. This is what we're hearing. This is the source of it, but it's not confirmed. And, you know, making sure you're doing your due diligence in journalism to cover your bases and say, like, hey, this is not definitively the truth, but this is what we are hearing. This is what's going on. You know, it's still our duty to kind of report and cover that, even if it's not, you know, a done deal yet. And that's what we did. So, you know, it was very hectic, but, you know, a lot of it was just kind of sending a lot of text messages, a lot of, you know, scrolling on different feeds and social medias and message boards, and, you know, getting absolutely all the sources we could. And, you know, we only put out the original report because we were confident that, you know, you had a source like 24/7 Sports put that out, that's a pretty reputable source. You know, 24/7 Sports is a massive media figure here in the United States and in college sports. So, you know, I don't regret putting that report out. I'm glad we were able to get it corrected in the morning with the updated report. Again, I want to clarify that at the time of the first report, that was factual information. You know, it was a moving and a fluid situation that then changed. It wasn't that we put out a wrong report. But yeah, I mean, that was the biggest thing, was just kind of touching my bases and reaching out to a whole lot of people, and, you know, using the connections I've built over. I've been doing this. I became assistant editor as a freshman, and I guess I'm a junior now. So I've been doing this for around 3 years. So I built a lot of connections that I had to kind of lean on in this time.
Yeah, very cool. It pays off. It all paid off. Mm-hmm.
What do you love about reporting on sports?
I love, and kind of a bit of a 180 there, I actually do love the kind of hectic nature of it, you know. I love that what happened one day can be completely different the next day, and, you know, the best player can then become the worst player, and the worst player can become the best player. And I love the, you know, the unpredictable nature of it. I'm someone who I would say is kind of, most sports journalists will tell you this, whether they want to admit it or not. I mean, I feel like by this point in my life, I probably couldn't survive without the chaos a little bit. You know, I need I need something always going on, you know. And it's stressful sometimes. It's busy, and you know, sometimes it's difficult with my personal life. But there's always something to do in sports, especially college sports. A school like UK that has so many varsity programs. I mean, I'm not out at every single event anymore like I was my freshman year and even some of my sophomore year. But you know, I'm still reading the stories and editing stories and sending people to places. And, you know, I really, really like just how kind of chaotic it is, but how many different stories there are. You can kind of, with any given game, you can really pick the narrative you want to kind of share. You know, every player has a story in every game. You know, the coach has a story. You know, you post-game, you talk to the other team's coach and players. You talk to Calipari after a basketball game. You talk to 3 players. And football, it's even more players than that. So, you know, it's almost like you're in a grape, like an apple tree full of stories, and you just get to pick whichever one you want to. And, you know, obviously there's stories that are bigger than others that you just have to report. But I like you know, being able to tell so many stories and being able to, you know, dive into something so much deeper than that.
Yeah. So let's touch on the actual matchup that occurred this past weekend. So can you give us some insight into the history of Louisville versus Kentucky?
Yeah, so one that's not historically the biggest in football that has gotten a lot bigger in recent times. Kentucky and Louisville is one of the biggest collegiate rivalries in all of college sports. You see that a lot in college sports, in-state rivalries. I mean, you got Duke, North Carolina. You have obviously the classic Washington State, or the different state schools versus or flagship schools. And in-state rivalries are always lovely. They're always so fun because they divide states like that. And people in my family are Louisville fans. People in my family are Kentucky fans. It's you go back and forth, but.
Not in my house.
Nope.
All Kentucky.
I was gonna say
There you go. But people on our staff are Louisville fans, which is kind of wild to me. I mean, how you're a student at UK and a Louisville fan, but it is what it is. But yeah, so it's typically been a lot bigger basketball rivalry, but lately with the the Kentucky under Mark Stoops, and Louisville's had its years, and right now it's had a really good year this year that will be remembered less than because of this past game. But it's a big rivalry, and historically I would say Louisville's gotten pretty good over Kentucky because Kentucky's been historically not very good. I think the last time they won might have been with Lamar Jackson. Who's he? I don't know if you've ever heard of Lamar Jackson. But, Kentucky's now with this win, they've won 5 straight, so it's been a little bit of dominance by the Cats. Little L's down there, but yeah, I mean it's been a big one, and especially this year with Kentucky needing a win like that. Having struggled, it was going into the game 6-5, on the verge of going 6-6, which would have been its worst year since 2015, I believe. And Louisville, that was 10-1, very slim chances, I will add, but still had active playoff chances if they would have been able to go into the ACC title game 11-1 and beat undefeated Florida State. They certainly would have had a case for the playoffs, number 10 in the country. So it was a big-time game with a lot. I mean, up until the final interception that sealed the deal with Louisville's loss, that stadium was full. It was packed. Louisville fans, a lot of Kentucky fans, but Louisville fans, and especially with Louisville's how to put it, collapse in basketball. They've been abhorrent the last 2 years. I don't see how Kenny Payne gets out of this season, by the way. But with Louisville struggling so much in basketball, it's been a lot of fans have put a lot of emphasis on the football team this year and kind of really attached themselves to that because, when you go to a college, you want to pick the team that's most successful a lot of the time. So it was one that was really, really big, and it's one that has a lot of history behind it across all sports and in college. I mean, it's a rivalry in every sport you can think of. The biggest club hockey game is when Kentucky plays Louisville for Kentucky. One of the biggest volleyball games is when Kentucky plays Louisville. I was at the selection show last night with the volleyball team, and when they were looking at where they drew, they had arguably a louder reaction for where Louisville drew than where they actually drew. Soccer teams, they hate Louisville. The baseball team hates Louisville. They play them every year. The softball team hates them. I mean, it's every single sport. Kentucky and Louisville are a big rivalry.
That's awesome. Quick tangent. The last basketball coach for Louisville, what was his name? Chris something?
Chris Mack, I believe.
Yeah, Chris Mack. I worked at a Dunkin' Donuts, and he would come through the drive-thru all the time. So.
Did you mess up his coffee order just
No.
because? Oh, that's really
Yeah,
nice.
he would always get donuts for his kids, so I would never do something like that.
No.
Oh, that's very kind.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of issues with that program, and just throwing things out there without getting too much into it. Extortion, blackmail, all kinds of recruiting violations. I mean, Louisville's a mess. But
Yeah.
ever since Pitino, I mean, even a little bit before Pitino, but Pitino,
Kentucky would never.
No.
We would never do something like that. Just saying.
Kentucky would
We're angels.
Kentucky's never received the death penalty before. I mean,
Nope.
Nope, didn't happen.
We would never do something
Fake
like
news.
that. So I'm curious about what it's like after you've covered a game. What's it like, or while you're covering a game, but like after the game ends? What does it look like when you write the article? When do you usually leave the stadium? And then what does your access look like to these events? And do you think that UK does a good job?
Yeah, I think UK does a good job. I can run you through what my job was like at the Louisville game, if that's a good way to put you through it.
Yeah.
So I showed up to the stadium. You always go to media will call. There's always a specific media entrance, not just a normal gate. You got to get your bag checked, of course. That's got to get your bag checked, got to get your media pass, and then usually there's some kind of elevator that'll take you up to a press box. There's different types of press boxes. Some are kind of open, which are just like kind of like a ledge. They're like within the stands, kind of like that, with no windows. Some of them are completely indoors, like Kroger Field is an indoor press box, for example, at the very top. And then some of them are kind of hybrids. They're able to open. Mississippi State was like that. This one was a closed press box, but you get up there. Usually there's some kind of media meal. I did not get anything at Louisville, but
Figures.
I got there a little bit late. I had a little bit of a slow start to the morning, so I got up there like right before kickoff. Typically, we'd put out a tweet around 30 minutes before the game, usually something on the field saying we're there. Sometimes we'll do a pregame stand-up depending on the game, so I did not do one for this one. But, covering the game, you're kind of just – I write my Buzzer Gamer article and At the Whistle article. I write those during the game, so I'm kind of writing them as the game is going on, as I'm kind of piecing together what the story is myself. And that can create some problems when a game comes right down to the wire. But for the most part, usually it's pretty simple to do. You just kind of tell the story as it happens. And update that while also doing a concurring Twitter thread. We're big on social media this year. So covering the game is pretty simple. We also have a stat website that's available to us that kind of breaks down each play. It kind of keeps track of who's doing what. It keeps track of, who did what. And that's really handy. They also have people up there, when you're watching the game, sometimes it can be a bit confusing. You're like, if you're watching it in person, like not on commentary, there's someone up in the press box that goes over a loudspeaker and will say, that was a 5-yard rush for blah, 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 and kind of tell you what's happening as well, so you can kind of keep track of it. But no, you get pretty good at the idea of where you can get good enough at doing buzzer stories that I usually have my story ready to publish by the time the game ends. So once I do that, I publish that on the website, put out my final score tweet, and then I send that to our social team. And usually after that, it's kind of a mad dash. In just about every arena, you're kind of trying to pack up as quickly as you can to get down to the press conference area. At Kroger Field, for example, you have to cross where the players come off the field. So if you're kind of slow there, you're going to be stuck for a little while. Depends. A lot of stadiums, it's kind of just like I'm trying to follow other people because I don't necessarily know where to go if I'm in a stadium I've never been to before. But you get down to the press conference area, you'll usually talk to the coach, Mark Stoops, and then both coordinators, Liam Cohen and Brad White, and then a handful of players, depending on how much of a rush they're in. So at Mississippi State, they're in a pretty big rush, so we only got 2 players, and they both came out at the same time. In this case, we got to talk to 3 players that all came out at different times, or actually I think it was 4. So it just depends on how much of a rush they're in. Obviously, Louisville, they're not in a super big rush because that's not super far away. But so once you do the press conference, to get down to this press conference, obviously every press conference area is different, but usually you'll have field access. The only place I've ever been that you're not allowed on the field is South Carolina. They say no field access whatsoever, which I don't know why that is, but that's how it was.
Interesting.
After we do the press conference, I usually go into trying to do my stand-up, which I like to do on the field or on the court, wherever I'm at, if it's basketball. So I went back out on the field, set up my tripod, set up my phone, got my microphone, and went through 5 or 6 different takes of, stuttering over my words. There was one I had that was pretty good, and then I got to the end, and I was like, wait a second, I don't know how I want to end this. I didn't think about it whatsoever. So it was a good stand-up. I got to the end, I was like, well, what do I say now? I've done one before where I was doing a basketball game, and I just started doing the stand-up, and I was like, what was the score again? I forgot what the final score was. So there's always some kind of issues doing those, but you can do those as many times as you need to until you get those really ready to go. And a little behind-the-scenes trick, a lot of the TV people do that too. A lot of the TV people will rehearse theirs before they actually have the live ones, so everybody's rehearsing those. Everybody, when you're doing your stand-up, usually on the field with about 6 or 7 other people who are also doing stand-ups. So you kind of got to pick your moment and pick your spacing pretty well so you're not hearing a ton of audio, but that's what microphones are for. Once the stand-up is done, you then have 2 options. So option 1, most press boxes are open up to 3 hours after a game. So you can go back up. I know a lot of people prefer to kind of go back up there and they'll kind of write their stories and do some secondary stories and whatnot. Or you can head on home. For Louisville, I decided to go on home because it wasn't that far of a drive. I didn't have very far to go, so I knew I could get some work done at home. If it's somewhere that I am kind of far away, I will go back up to the press box because I need to get some stories out in a more timely manner. But typically, most press boxes, the pros and cons of staying are in the press box. You've got Wi-Fi. You don't have to go anywhere. You're in a working environment, and usually they'll have drinks that are out there you can get. Like sometimes Kroger Field has a soda fountain. Some of them just have canned drinks in like a fridge or something like that. Sometimes they lock them, and that's kind of annoying when they do that. But there's usually some kind of food options. But it really just depends on preference at that point. If you want to go back up there, if you want to go on home, either way, after the game, it's kind of just breaking down what were the storylines. A lot of times there's storylines that didn't emerge themselves in the game, but you kind of get them from the press conference. Players will say something, you're like, oh, that's kind of a really good story. So you're kind of just looking for those things throughout the press conferences. And I mean, for every game, I would say there's, a handful of stories that we simply don't write because of manpower, or because, it's not the biggest story. But there's so many stories that come out of every single game. We can only hope to do as many of those as we can, and as many of those that I think will make the best story and have the most content available to them.
What has been your favorite story that you've written?
That's a loaded question. I don't know. One that always sticks out to me is actually one of the first basketball stories I ever wrote, and that was during the first year of Oscar Tshiebwe, my freshman year. One of the first games I covered was Kentucky men's basketball against Southern. Southern is a HBCU. For those of you who don't know, it's a historically black college or university. So typically a lot less funding, a lot smaller, and typically somewhere in the South. So this one was Southern. I believe that's in Louisiana, maybe. They are the Jaguars. And it was the first year of what Kentucky's done for 3 years now, called the Unity Series. So last year it was Florida A&M. This year it was their exhibition against Kentucky State, which is the HBCU within Kentucky. But the story wasn't even about the game at all. Actually, they kind of just, the players got to talk, and Calipari and the Southern head coach, they all talked the day before the game. They had gone up to Cincinnati and visited the Underground Railroad Museum. And they kind of got to see some of that, and they went not as a team. They went as both teams. Both teams kind of went together on this trip and kind of got to share these experiences amongst each other. And Kentucky also brought in all the Southern players and helped them meet with. He's since left for, I believe, North Carolina, but T.J. Bisner was the NIL guy for Kentucky, and he talked with the Southern players about NIL opportunities and how to kind of build a brand for yourself, because that's something that at a school like Southern they don't really have a lot of. You don't really have as much spotlight on you. You don't have as much resources, and you don't have that kind of availability. So they kind of got the opportunity to talk about some of those things, and I also talked a little bit about how there's a concept in sports called a buy game. And, a lot of people get frustrated when they see Kentucky playing schools like, who are they playing? It's like UNC Wilmington or Stonehill or Texas A&M Commerce. But the fact of the matter is, while those are just kind of merely tune-up games for Kentucky, those other programs would cease to exist without those games. The reason a lot of those, you were like, why would a small school put itself in a situation to come up here and lose by 60? That doesn't make sense. Because they need the money. Kentucky pays them to come up here, and the money that team gets for that game is oftentimes one of the only things keeping that program afloat. And especially at a school, Kentucky's the same way with its sports, but the men's basketball and football program also help fund every other athletic program in the school. So, you can call this a hyperbole, but there's times where if, a school like Stonehill didn't come up to Kentucky and lose, or didn't go to other schools like UConn and lose, maybe they have to shut down their baseball team. Maybe they can't afford to have one anymore. And it was kind of the coach of Southern kind of talked about it. Southern actually kept it pretty close, and that was the same year that I believe Texas Southern upset Florida in their in that HBCU matchup. But he talked about it. He's like, every year schools in our conference go into conference play with a losing record because they had to play all these big schools who are going to beat the crap out of them to stay alive. To fund their universities, especially at a small school like that. That funding probably doesn't just go to the athletic department. It probably goes to most departments in their school. And it was a really eye-opening experience to me, not that I didn't already know about those things, but it just kind of highlighted a lot of those issues to me about, the plight of some of those smaller schools. And, a lot of people watch Division I sports, especially college basketball and college football. They love those sports, but they see all those smaller schools and they're like, why is that team D1? That doesn't make any sense. Get that team out of here. Why Why is Howard in the NCAA tournament this year? Why is Texas out in the NCAA tournament this year? They don't deserve a tournament bid, but they don't really know, the struggles those schools kind of go through and the struggles that, still exist in this country from those darker times, when you look back at why HBCUs exist in the first place. So I would say that's probably one of my favorite stories I've ever written, was kind of calling, it was a basketball secondary story, but it wasn't really a basketball story at all. It was kind of looking at that just in general. I would say other ones that have options to be up there are a lot of the features I've done. I love some of the features I've written. I wrote one on Trey Mitchell this year about, his journey to being a Kentucky basketball player and growing up with his mom and, the hardship he's gone through. So that one's a pretty cool story. I did one about Caitlin Barenbaum. She was on the stunt team last year, about how she basically helped push the stunt team to become a varsity D1 sport in the first place, and how that whole process was. She felt like she's truly leaving behind a legacy at Kentucky by doing that. There's a ton of really great stories out there that I love looking for those and kind of putting light on those stories.
I have to ask. I feel like this is a big controversial question with University of Kentucky. Do you think we are a football or basketball school?
I think there's no debate whatsoever that Kentucky's a basketball school. I think that people put too much stock into that. It doesn't mean you can't be good at football, but when you look at Kentucky as a brand, people who aren't super into college sports, when I think of Kentucky, they're more likely to think of the basketball team than the football team. There are people outside of this country that like Kentucky basketball.
Yeah.
There's less people outside this country like Kentucky football. And when you look at history, you look at, general fan base, Kentucky's a basketball school. And I think it, for the most part, probably always will be. Just the same way Alabama, it was the number 1 overall seed in basketball last year. It was still a football school. Alabama's going to be a football school.
I agree as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all I have for him.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Follow me on Twitter or X, ColePark_WSC.
Okay,
Trying to get my followers
Plug
up.
yourself.
And don't forget to listen to the sports podcast.
Yes.
I am on that too. Yeah.
Yes,
forgot
Cole
about
is
that.
on that. Yes.
I'm on that.
When does it come out?
So our basketball podcasts are recorded every Wednesday and hopefully come out during the weekend. Our football podcasts, which will be coming to an end now that the season's over, are recorded on Tuesdays. So basketball might be moving up to Tuesdays. We're kind of working on that. It's a work in progress. But generally those come out throughout the week. There's 2 that have been coming out. It'll be 1, but look for those around Friday or Saturday most weeks.
On YouTube and Spotify at kykernel.com.
Yes, we also try to share those on Twitter at kykernelsports, but also follow me because I'll retweet it too.
Yes, for sure.
All right, Cole. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. All right, welcome back to Scoops Out of the Litter, where we tell you what you need to know as a college student about local, state, and national news. So our first story for today is R.I.P. Rosalynn Carter.
Oh my God, she's such a girl boss. She was an advocate. Let me tell you about this woman. First off, First Lady Jimmy Carter. She died at 96. She lived a very long life, and she was an advocate for mental health. So really, she was a fantastic woman. So rest in peace. Thank you for all you've done.
Yep.
Rest in peace.
R.I.P. her. Yeah, Cole is with us here as well.
Yes.
We don't usually have guests join us for Scoops, but
I didn't know.
yeah, but welcome. No, it's okay. We're happy to have you. You're a journalist, so you understand what we're doing. So for our second story today, we're going to talk about Keenan Bishop and the Quiet Life. This is a story from Renna, who was on the podcast. Was that a week ago? Or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, she was on the podcast 2 weeks ago. She did Picture Kentucky, which we have another podcast about, so double podcast plug right there. Listen to those. You probably want to listen to the Picture Kentucky one more so, though, because our articles are beginning to come out on our website about Picture Kentucky on kykernel.com. And so what Picture Kentucky is basically a journalism workshop, a photojournalism workshop, where you get a camera, you get a subject, and then you go out and you do a story. And so a bunch of those are super interesting. They're about people around Frankfurt and close by to Frankfurt. And so I just recommend reading all of those. I think they're all pretty well written, and there's going to be a bunch of photos that you can look at with them as well. They're pretty short reads, too. So
Didn't you write and photograph?
I did write
article?
one. It was just about the river, though. I don't know if that's going to get posted. That might be too boring, honestly.
Wow.
But hopefully it does. I thought I took okay photos. I don't know. And then for our final story, Trump was at the Clemson USC game this weekend.
I will say they're getting pretty chippy about that USC. They want to say U of SC now.
U of SC?
You of us.
Yeah, because USC is Southern California.
So is USC West, are they getting mad about that?
No, it's more so that South Carolina is getting annoyed of not being recognized as the actual USC, so they're going U of SC now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I've heard, that they want to be recognized as USC because they're mad about the other USC.
Yeah,
but I didn't know that
it's
they
not
wanted to
working out
change.
very well
Yeah,
for
so
'em.
they want to change it to U of SC.
Some people do. Some people are very passionate about it being U of SC. I think the school actually did change it to U of SC.
Yeah,
now,
they should just make it college.
Yeah, I mean,
CSC.
CSC.
Yeah, and then they can have it. There you go. Done.
Problem solved.
Lost to Clemson University.
Yeah, they did lose. But isn't Clemson Trump's team?
Maybe.
I think it was rooting for Clemson this weekend. That's what I heard.
Dad was a pretty
Yeah.
big, Jesus guy, so maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if Trump is going to be that dedicated to religious people this campaign. I saw a quote from him that said he called them dumb, and he was like, "I already have them in the palm of my hand. I don't need to cater to them anymore." I saw something along the lines of that. That's not exactly so.
Here's the bigger question. How vigorously does Trump like Clemson? Is he there? Is he wearing the face paint? Is he in this? Does he have a jersey? That's what I need to know.
He's already wearing the face paint. He's already orange.
That's fair. I need to know if he. I need to know.
Yeah,
if
that
he
was the
has a
only.
Clemson
That was the
jersey.
only reason I'm talking about this story, because I wanted to get that banger off. I want to get that
Nate was
banger
waiting.
joke
He was
off.
just like, "Come on, somebody bring it up."
But yeah, he went to the game. He outshone Nikki Haley, who is the governor of, or was the former governor of South Carolina, which I thought was a boss move. I mean, you can talk about Trump all you want. I think I've said this on the podcast before, but he's just like a boss. I don't like him, but he makes boss moves.
Nate is very passionate about this topic.
He wins the I don't care war. He really does.
I mean, outshining. That's objectively funny, right? It's
Yes,
objectively a funny
that is so
move.
funny that he showed up to the biggest college football matchup in that state, and he knew Nikki Haley was going to be there. And he knew that all the frat boys from Clemson and South Carolina were going to love him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very funny. We talked about him going to a college football
Yes,
game earlier this
Iowa.
year.
It was
yeah.
Iowa State,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. When
Went
they
to a
did the
frat house.
caucus. Yeah. And he didn't go to the debates, was it? Yeah, he's such a boss. Yeah, he's a boss.
College football's #1 fan.
Yeah, seriously. He just shows up and oh my gosh.
Only for in-state rivalry games.
Oh.
Expect him at Kentucky Louisville next year.
Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
yes please. That would be funny.
Nate just calling him a boss the entire time.
No, he's gonna run. He's not gonna win this year, but then the year that Andy Bashir runs, he's gonna show up to Kentucky Louisville, and he's gonna try and go give the governor's cup out. You know how Andy usually gives it.
Do
He's
we
gonna
think
try to
he'll
grab
be-
it and give it out.
L's up or L's down?
L's down for sure. Louisville always votes blue. He's going to be L's down.
Yeah, he's gonna be out down. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you all for listening so much. Outro song.